Welcome to Crypto Kid Podcast, back at it again. So today I have a special guest, Max, and he's involved with blockchain technology and crypto space. And he's going to be talking a little bit about making cryptocurrency a religion in a way, and how it's different from Broad Apes and shit like that. So Max, why don't you tell me how you got involved in the arena?
Oh man, gosh, I wouldn't call myself an OG. In fact, there are some young men who are younger than I who pulled me aside at a coffee shop one day. They overheard me talking about something, and basically, these guys, a couple of guys, pulled me aside in 2011 and told me about this technology called Bitcoin. And I was blown away. Of course, I'm I'm not particularly tech savvy, and at the time, this was even before Mount Gox, so getting it was really difficult. So I said, "Look, can we get together? Can you help me do this, and help me acquire some?" I was like, "I can put $1,000 on it." Now this is 2011, and he's like, "Sure, we'll do it together next time we get together for coffee." And he got his email. Well, we never got back together for that coffee. And of course, I'm considerably poorer for it. But I will say I have never stopped being a cheerleader. And you're right. And to some degree, I like to frame it as, what if we treated the cryptocurrency space as sacred, as more like a religion, rather than more like a gambling casino?
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I know that it's the market's going up and it's gaining popular again. And people
Yeah.
are constantly asking me, hey, how much money did you make out of it? And to be honest, I'm not like really into the space for the money. I'm into the space because I see great value in the long term. Like what I mean in the long term is the future of governance and law, and how there's going to be mass adoption towards this
Yeah.
technology. And can you give me some insight on the valuability of this technology?
Yeah. I mean, I think, well, let's put it this way. I think that we're finally coming out of the last winter to some degree. The last crypto winter. I think there was a lot of emphasis on DeFi, and there's not anything wrong with that per se, but it depends on the nature of the DeFi project you're talking about. But more importantly, there was the whole NFT craze, and that seemed to me to be a bubble all along. Now, that's not to say that the technology behind NFTs and NFTs themselves as a concept are not important or not useful. They are. It's just the way they were treated. And this is the difference between the sacred and the profane thing that I'm trying to get across. So and you asked me specifically about the technology. I think finally we're getting to some maturity on the DAO space, distributed autonomous organizations, or DAX in other contexts, other tokens. Using the Ethereum language there, but the maturation of the DAO space, I think, is going to be super important to this, in the way we organize ourselves as human beings. I like to think of this stuff. So backing up, I'm kind of like, I see myself a bit differently than most people do in terms of the technological solutions, or being really into, as a coder, say, what they're building or functionality wise. I mean, I obviously keep abreast of it, but I see my role in the crypto space as almost being like the old wise man sitting on your shoulder, or standing beside you, on the journey, saying, don't forget why we're doing this. And I like to put it in terms of the 5 M's. Okay. Mission. We're doing this, if we believe Satoshi Nakamoto, we're doing this to increase our self-sovereignty as human beings, right? To move away from the centralization of power to decentralized power. So that's mission. Morality. What's right and wrong, right? What does it mean to live a good life? Right? We got to remember that. What does it mean to, what's right, what's wrong, what is the good? We can't leave that aside. That's just critical to our nature as human beings, and to building the good society together. Meaning. What does it mean to live a good life, a fulfilling life, a life of happiness, but also deeper meaning? Can't forget that. So that's the third M. Fourth is mutualism. How do we look out for each other, right? How do we better take care of each other and not outsource that to distant capitals? Because every time we do that, the powerful take advantage of us. They want us on their plantation, as it were. And finally, there's the money part. Everybody knows about the money part, but developing sound money. And of course, crypto is not always just about money. It's about all sorts of functional things that can be built on smart contracts, DAOs, and the like. Establishing relationships that are more trustless, that don't require so much trust in third parties. But at the end of the day, I believe if we explore these 5 categories, we're going to get much closer to something that's sacred rather than something that is profane or just about money or just about profit or just about making a buck. You see what I mean?
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up all those points, because there's so many questions I could build off that. Just like going back to how crypto started, I remember back in like 2012, 2013, I was in college, and just hearing about Bitcoin, I was like, oh, what is that? That's pretty cool. Because I was researching things about the stock market. I was putting investments into like marijuana trades, because I was so hopeful that marijuana was going to be legal, and if I get in early, it's going to raise the stock prices and I'll be like really, really rich or really wealthy. And then my friend's like, you know, I think you're in the wrong arena. You should be looking at like cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin. And I was like looking at the price at the time. It was like $100 or $98. And I was like, that's too high, man. That's too high. And I was like in the penny stocks, just thinking now, looking back, like, I'm like, oh shit. Oh man, I really fucked up.
Hey,
But
me too.
but really,
And look, I'm not trying to say that there's no financial incentive here. I check every day, see what the price is on all my stuff, almost habitually, but I don't allow myself to get too blue when we go through winters. I've been through 3 winters now,
it's almost expected. It's so it's correction. But
that's right.
Going back to my story is that I was doing more research about it, and I was like, okay, so how are people using Bitcoin? He's like, the dark web. I was like, what? The dark web? And at the time, I didn't even know what it was. I wasn't really into technology. I was like, can you explain to me what this dark web is? And he's like, yeah, dude, this goes really deep. And like, this is how people buy weapons, drugs, and other really disgusting things like I shouldn't even mention. And I was like, and that kind of turned me off a bit about it. And that's like one of the huge reasons why I didn't invest. I was like, well, if law enforcement finds out that I'm looking at Bitcoin or I'm investing in Bitcoin, then they're going to be thinking I'm doing shady shit. And I didn't want that. I was like, no, I'm not going to do it. So that's when I backed off. And then as time goes on, I started pondering, I started wondering, like, is there going to be other cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin? And sure enough, there was. And then I was looking at like famous people like Steve Wozniak, like someone that I admire that helped build Apple. And he was interested, and he was starting to see the potential. He's like, I really like it because you could buy stuff on the internet, like shoes or miscellaneous things. So I was like, okay, so if these like figures of the world like are expressing interest, like this must be something big, because you have to have the good with the bad. Like, even though people do bad things with it, you can still do good things with this kind of technology. And that's really what took off my spirit about cryptocurrencies. And then like when you mentioned what's his name, Satoshi Nakamoto, I was like, who is this guy? And maybe you could explain it a little bit better and give your opinion. Like, do you think he's alive, or do you think he's still around, and he wanted to go ghost on purpose because he didn't want anybody to know that he built this great technology? Or do you think it's like a team of people that built it? Like, there's a couple conspiracy theories, like the CIA built it or another entity did. But what's your thoughts about that?
I have gone down not the complete rabbit trail on a lot of these theories, but there's some really interesting theories out there. A lot of people, I think Nick Szabo is a good candidate. Nick Szabo is both a legal theorist and computer scientist. I think he was from the University of Washington. In any case, he's a brilliant guy, and he developed so many of the features that ended up making it into the white paper. And of course, he was cited. Now, would he cite himself to cover his tracks? Perhaps. But the Byzantine generals problem and some of the other things, and the thing he tried to build first, which was, if I recall, BitGold, he was really one of the OGs. If he was not part of that team, then his influence is strong. There was Hal Finney, who's now dead. He could have been involved, but he was, Hal Finney was had Parkinson's or ALS or something like that, some kind of degenerative neurological disease, and he eventually succumbed to that. I couldn't tell you whether there are instances of Satoshi posting after Hal Finney's death. We could easily find that online right now, but he could have been involved in that team even if he did die. So, and then of course there's Craig Wright saying it's me.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the guy for Blockstream, Adam Back out of the UK. And there are some things about the original white paper that suggest, I think there's one instance or a couple of instances of a UK style spelling that would suggest someone from Australia or Britain rather than the US. That being said, there was somebody brought up the other day, as early as 1996, I want to say it was an NSA sanctioned or published paper that had a pseudonym that was a Japanese sounding name, sort of like Satoshi Nakamoto. And it was about a digital money, cryptographic money. So man, it just makes that all the more mysterious for me. I have no idea. I will say I very much enjoyed the readings of Nick Szabo, the guy I mentioned first, and his legal theory. And he also, studies the origins of money, how people use money, starting from seashells, going on up, the sort of emergent aspect of what people value and how they started to trade it. And so I found him just interesting as an intellectual. Part of me hopes that he is involved or it's him, but man, I couldn't say.
All right. And one other thing you mentioned earlier about decentralizing and DeFi network and taking the power out of the banks and things like that. See, what I'm thinking is that eventually, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that eventually the banks are going to want to get involved in the digital assets because they're going to want to be in control. And originally, when Bitcoin came out, it was to be untraceable. Now the law is catching up, and now they're able to trace Bitcoin and what you're using and what you're buying it for and things like that. So it's just like, it's kind of leveling out. So there's no longer anonymous view of things anymore. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, Bitcoin has always been it's always been pseudonymous to an extent, but they can certainly trace it back to you. And there's a whole forensic analysis of Bitcoin blockchain now where they can basically chase the transactions back throughout, because if the blockchain is immutable, that they're all there from the beginning of time. Every single transaction that's ever been and perhaps ever will be is recorded on the blockchain. So this blockchain forensics has been around for a while. The question is, do we want, there are technologies emerging now called anonymizers that allow you to evade some of this stuff. And then there are, of course, technologies like Monero and Zcash, which for a very long time have been had anonymous transactions, where you can, for example, Zcash, you can you can enable something that allows you to make anonymous transactions. That goes back to the question of whether and to what extent it's better to have transparency versus untransparency, or being able to obscure your transactions because you're working on the dark web. You're wanting to mask your behavior because you're doing something bad and they're going to come after you for it. I tend to think that there is room for both. And I tell you why, because yes, the trade-off is that you are able to, or you're going to enable people who are working in these dark markets. However, it's like you said just a minute ago, we don't want to give the powerful the ability to control us. And the more totalitarian things get in this world through technological means, the less sovereign we're going to be, the less meaningful our lives are going to be, and so on, with those 5 M's that I mentioned earlier. So it's sort of like, and we may not agree about this. I hope you'll permit me to say it on your show, but it's sort of like the Second Amendment, right? It's like, yes, there are crazy people who shoot up innocent people. Yes, there's a lot of crime that's carried out with weapons. But at the end of the day, we need it to be a final check on totalitarian power, and that can never go away.
100%.
Yeah. So I see anonymous transactions as being the same, and pseudonymous interaction as being the same. I also think that we can develop self-sovereign identity systems that accrue reputation, right? So you might be pseudonymous. Let's just say you're the only people that nobody's ever seen your face, and you're just Crypto Kid 1 2 3 4 5, right? And that's your identifier. And every interaction with you that someone has had, whether in transacting with you or interacting with you in whatever way, as Crypto Kid 1 2 3 4 5, they say, you know what, this guy's ace. He's good. I got what I wanted out of the transaction, or my interaction with him was totally positive, or whatever. And in that, and you can port that along with that self-sovereign identity and use that pseudonymous avatar wherever you go, as long as you're interacting in that skin, as it were. I think that's a very promising avenue of development that's going to allow for more kind of DAO interactions and things like that, that keep the powerful away, but allow for sort of reputation capital to accrue. And people who are not interested in dark markets and things like that, but don't want to give up their anonymity or their pseudonymity, can use self-sovereign identity plus reputation.
Right. And that's the whole thing. That's why the United States was built, is just for able to have privacy and ownership of their things, like property and things like that. And eventually, as time progressed, they realized that you need law enforcement to help you protect your property from thieves and things like that. But it was very, very limited. They had, like, their control was on a thin string. But in my opinion, I think that the government is trying to get more power and more control over the people, like basically like how the Soviet Union did. So just like mass control, collectivization, and controlling how much money you can make, what you do as a career, and no freedom of speech or freedom to do what you want, and taking away imaginations and dreams away from people. And it seems pretty close to where we're going, heading in that direction. But going back to cryptocurrency, it's just like people can see the freedom in it. Like, all right, now this is a way that I could transaction my Bitcoin to someone in Japan and have them ship me over this product, like shoes or whatever. And that's just between us. But now I was doing tax. It's tax season now. So I was talking to my accountant. He's like, are you dealing with any cryptocurrency assets? Because now you have to report it. And now Big Brother is like, you have to pay Uncle Sam now, because you have these these digital assets, and we want a piece of the pie too. You know what I mean? So what are
Yeah.
your thoughts about them taxing your cryptos?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's rotten. Obviously, I don't like it. I don't like taxation anyway. I'm kind of an extremist in this regard. I much prefer a regime of fees or you know, pay for what you use, pay for what you consume, and voluntary mutual aid arrangements and voluntary cooperation. Essentially, I in my work ask, to what degree can we develop a voluntary society, a society based on the consent of the governed, which is the words in the Declaration of Independence, right? That's another founding concept of our country. And I don't buy that your failure of imagination on the consent of the governed justifies your taxing and redistributing my meager resources to everything under the sun. Never mind that right now we're being taxed through inflation. Mm-hmm. And that's going to come back in 2024. You better believe it. So I'm not a fan of taxation, and I think the world could run without it, and I think a good world could be built without it. However, in terms of specifically taxing cryptocurrency, it's like, to what extent can we evade that? And because there are these on-ramps and off-ramps, like Coinbase, like Binance, like, any of the other exchanges, they function as intermediaries, as banks, and this is kind of unavoidable until we are able to build a real parallel economy that's not just about buying drugs and weapons, but as a parallel economy where everything just functions in cryptocurrency. The powers that be are going to find those leverage points, those places where they can extract their blood from a turnip, and perhaps in our cases. I hope you have a good crypto stash. Mine is modest, but I'm happy with it. I'm not as happy with it as I could be if I had gotten in early in 2011. But in any case, I do, I see the potential for it as creating self-sovereign peoples and communities, or people and communities. And I am hopeful about it despite the taxation regime. I do feel the noose tightening, or rather the vice tightening, with respect to some of the regulatory controls. Just recently, Elizabeth Warren, the senator from Massachusetts, is basically trying to ban crypto, as far as I can tell. And I don't think she's going to get very far, but slowly but surely they're trying to co-opt it. I'm not even terribly sanguine about, of course, I like the idea of the price going up, but I'm not terribly sanguine about the long-term prospects for Bitcoin, for example. When we think about an ETF being approved, what's that all about? So I'm not terribly sure about BlackRock. I know that people are becoming excited about the prospect of the price of Bitcoin going up if a Bitcoin ETF is approved by the government. Okay, and I'm excited about that prospect in the short term. I'm less sanguine about the long-term viability of Bitcoin if so much Bitcoin is being held by this third party. I mean, it goes against the very idea of Bitcoin. I think we need to educate people in terms of self-custody. It's easy to custody your own Bitcoin, even if it's a software wallet, and that's not perfect. But that's better than leaving your money on an exchange. And if you're talking about one of the largest financial institutions in the world that controls billions of dollars in assets, if there's some chicanery with the government, in terms of seizing people's Bitcoin, there's not much that we can do about it because it's not self-custody. So that is another vector of losing control that I worry about. And I don't mean it just for Bitcoin, because there are a lot of tokens out there that are really good and really solid. It depends on what properties you're looking for and what uses you have for them. But specifically with Bitcoin, which, up to this point seems like, one of the most solid cryptocurrencies. We talked about the problem of, of pseudonymity and whether or not it's traceable and all of those technological upgrades to Bitcoin and second layer solutions and things like that. But at the end of the day, it's the first and it's still the most important. It's the most secure, at least in most people's minds. There's some arguments about that, but I think at the end of the day, it's among at least the most secure. And so with this mass adoption, people think of it as like, okay, I'm just going to put this into my 401k. There's a level of stability that comes with that in terms of price stability. As long as the government doesn't, stays out of it, right? And the ETF holds all these people's Bitcoin in custody, then you're going to start to see not only price increases, but less price volatility. Because people aren't going to sell their Bitcoin out of the ETF tomorrow. It's an investment fund. So those are good things about it. But what I worry about is it's at odds with what Bitcoin was created to do, which was to allow you to be self-sovereign and custody your own funds. That's what I'm worried about. And if the government decides tomorrow that it's gone bankrupt and it needs to cling to power and BlackRock is sitting there with a whole bunch of Bitcoin, and the dollar's gone, is valueless, got, into hyperinflation, what are they going to do? They're going to turn to a whole big pot of money sitting right there at BlackRock, and they'll get it if they want it.
Yeah, I've talked about this before in my past interviews, is I think for the US to make digital assets their currency is you have to have inflation so they can get an excuse to adopting cryptocurrencies and making their own digital asset, for sure. And thank you for sharing that. Now, let's change this up a little bit. Let's talk about like some projects you're working on and some things you're doing to change the world. Like, how are you putting some dents in the universe?
Right on. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Well, one thing I do every day is I rather slavishly publish to my Substack, which is called Underthrow. Okay. Underthrow, which is also the title of a book, my most recent book I just came out with. And the idea of Underthrow is pretty simple. It's kind of the opposite or the obverse of overthrow. So if you think in terms of the powerful, what we can do with cryptocurrency is underthrow it, because through peaceful relationships, we're able to undermine these bloated and powerful third parties that want to take a cut of everything or want to tell us what to do with our money and our lives. And we underthrow them through peaceful means. So that's what that means. And so I play with those themes every single day. And I have a specific means of underthrow that I like to emphasize. It's very crypto friendly, and that's called subversive innovation. Okay. And subversive innovation is a threefold mandate. And it's going to sound kind of boring in like economics, but bear with me a second.
No, me say,
yeah.
Thing you said about it being boring, I showed someone my podcast and they're like, yep, it's time to go to sleep now. I was like, I know. It could be boring if you're not into it. But go ahead.
Well, people who are into this will get it. They'll get it when I say these three things. What we need to do is subversive innovators. And I mean innovators, people who are entrepreneurs and innovators who are out there in the world. I'm not talking about go voting, not talking about going out picketing on the streets. I'm talking about doing stuff that changes the world, just like Satoshi Nakamoto did. And then the first one is we need to operate with the threefold mandate of subversive innovation. And that is to reduce transaction costs. That is to say, make it easier for people to cooperate, collaborate, and transact, lower costs to do so. The second is raise predation costs. And that means make it harder and harder for third parties to make you their prey, right? Like the government does, like crime syndicates. So, and then the third aspect of a subversive innovation is to reduce the cost of exit, and that just means to make it a lower cost proposition to leave a system that isn't working for you and enter into another one. So, in terms of projects, that's really I have a project recently called the Constitution of Consent Contest. We had a $25,000 total cash and prizes for people to develop a constitution that was completely based on consent. The idea that and the idea would be you could spawn different jurisdictions, but that instead of it being, most people think of law as being an artifact of conquest, right? He who conquers this land makes the laws for it, right? And even if you have democracy or whatever, it's still an artifact of conquest and accident of birth, where you're a citizen of that country or not. This sort of really takes that idea and flips it to going back to that Jeffersonian idea of the consent of the governed. That is what he said that people have a right to in the Declaration of Independence. It's like, okay, let's put our money where Jefferson's mouth was. And so we had a Constitution of Consent contest. And there was a $20,000 winner, a $3,000 second place, and $2,000 third place prize winner. Now we're gonna the next phase, I'm hoping, is we're gonna take some of the best ideas of that, and we're gonna try to come up with a Constitution of Consent 1.0. And once we do, we're gonna treat that as open source, and we're gonna try to get that on a blockchain so that it's it's there and it's unable to be altered unless through a specific process, which is, will have to be detailed in the Constitution itself. But the idea is open source law. We fully accept the idea that code is open source, right? Or can be open source. We also know that it can be proprietary. But I think once we fully accept the idea of open source law, of open source code, we can also accept the idea of open source law. And that means people can opt into systems that are the most beneficial to them. And that is true freedom. That doesn't mean you can't honor your obligations and your responsibilities. It just means that we can set up, and we might set up and honor your obligations to it that you signed up for. So it'd be like a multilateral contract with subsidiary groups, niches, or organizations that might be more or less socialist as you please. Might have a universal basic income scheme or something like that. That wouldn't be the top layer. In any case, I'm going on about the details. Suffice it to say, that's one of the big projects I've got coming up. I want to continue that project, and I want to see that evolve, because I think the existence of such a constitution can teach people to reframe their mentality around the way law is supposed to be administered and enforced. And that will have a liberating effect on us. At least that's my hope. And my final big project is, I'm planting the seeds for starting a fraternal society around this kind of stuff. Really talked to you earlier about this idea of what would it be like to have a crypto religion. And so one of the things I'm working on is trying to answer that question with some sort of MVP little organization where if a few of us get together and we grow it and we grow it and we grow it. And I don't mean religion per se. I really mean a fraternal organization or a sororal organization. Fraternal is men, fraternity, brotherhood. Sororal is sisterhood. We want men and women to belong to it. You know what I mean? But the idea there would be to push forward, sort of like the Freemasons. What if you had a crypto Freemasons? What would that look like? The Freemasons became a powerful force in world affairs in past centuries. What does it look like to have one that's a crypto-based version of that? It's all about where crypto is just the way it gets instantiated, and crypto, of course, gets appreciated. But at the center of it is that mission, morality, meaning, mutualism, and money.
Absolutely. Yeah, I hope you get started with that. And it does sound very intriguing. And if you get that started, some information, and maybe I might join. Who knows? And
Right on.
and dude, you were talking about getting involved. I would look at a government blockchain association too. They're based out of Washington D.C. and these guys are a really good group, Gerard, and they all talk about governance, law, and I forget what the other one is, and how to make this all come together and cohesive. And there's people from the UN involved, like Dino. I met him up there in Washington D.C. So I think you would really like that and enjoy that group of people, and you could even talk about it at their events, and they would love to hear. They're very open to other to entrepreneurs and people with their great ideas. But yeah, how can people reach you? What's some of the links I could leave down below, like for the book and your social media and events that you're going to be at?
That's awesome. Well, first thing, it's easy to get in touch with me is underthrow.org. That's my Substack, and as soon as you sign up for that and you get one of my emails, daily emails, I publish every weekday, or at least try to. You can just respond to that and you'll reach me, and that's a great way. You can find me at the Subversion Showcase this summer at Freedom Fest in Las Vegas. I'll be speaking there, and people can enter the contest. If you have any listeners with cool ideas, subversive innovation ideas, you can submit to that. We're gonna have a big cash prize for the winner who has the best, sort of like Shark Tank, but for subversive innovations.
That's great. Hey, I plan on going out there. You meet Crypto Kid and Max, and yeah, man, I really appreciate you coming out to the show. And when we meet up at Subversive, catch up afterwards at the event, maybe get a cup of coffee or a beer. And yeah, I like to see what you're working on personally, and seeing some of the bills that you have going on. And what else? Well, that's pretty much it. So I really appreciate you taking the time,
Absolutely,
dude.
man.
I know you're busy. I know you're a busy guy, and it's an honor to have you on my show. And
I had a blast, and I keep up the great work with the show.
exactly. I'll try. I'm not making any promises, but I wish you the best on your endeavors, man. I really do. And yeah, hopefully you can come
Likewise.
back on the show, and we'll get an update on it.
All right, sounds good. Thank you so much.